Stephen Gordon's story isn't your typical tale of redemption. It's more like watching a roller coaster where the brakes fail halfway through. Born into a life of bullying, bad health, and an even worse temper, Stephen found a surprising home at Disneyland, where he was actually well-liked. But let's not get too attached to that version of Stephen, because the good times, they didn't last long. What followed was a downward spiral so dramatic it could be its own Netflix miniseries. There's kidnapping, ankle monitors, and a sketchy bromance with another ex-con. Oh, and the murders. Multiple murders. It all culminates in a courtroom showdown where Stephen, against all odds, chooses to represent himself. And let's just say his defense strategy isn't inspired by an episode of Law & Order. This is a story of self-destruction, sinister partnerships, and a justice system that somehow didn't catch on until it was far too late. Pull your blankets up to your chin because this one is dark. It's strange, and just when you think it can't get any worse, it absolutely does. But before we get into the story, if you like your true crime brief and bingeable, you have found the right podcast. I give you at least 2 episodes per week, so hit that follow button now. And welcome to 10-Minute Murder. It's one thing to represent yourself in court. It's another to represent yourself in court and treat it like an open mic night, where the goal is to air every grievance, implicate half your contact list, and somehow make the jury actively root against you. Stephen Dean Gordon wasn't just an accused murderer. He was a man on a mission to redefine the phrase self-destruction. From the moment he decided to forego a professional defense, Stephen's courtroom strategy was clear. Skip the denial, ignore the remorse, and aim straight for the chaos. He didn't try to prove his innocence or dispute the charges. No, Stephen had a different plan. Drag every probation officer, every law enforcement official, and possibly the courthouse janitor into the sinking ship of blame. Why stop at yourself when you can take the whole system down with you? And it wasn't just his lack of defense that raised eyebrows. Stephen treated the courtroom like a warped stage, dropping subpoenas on probation officers to testify about their supposed negligence as though they were the ones on trial for his crimes. It was less about proving anything and more about making sure everyone got a slice of the humiliation pie. And when the jury handed him a death sentence, Stephen didn't flinch. He actually thanked them, as if the whole proceeding was just a weird team-building exercise he'd been hoping to fail. But let's be real. The decision to represent himself wasn't about strategy or confidence in his legal skills. It was about control, a last-ditch effort to have the final word in a life he had already driven off the rails. Stephen didn't want justice. He wanted a stage. Too bad for him, the jury wasn't buying tickets. But that's how the story ends up. Let's rewind now and talk about how we got here. Stephen Dean Gordon's life didn't exactly start on easy mode. Born in 1969 in Linwood, California, and raised in Norfolk, young Stephen's childhood was a greatest hits compilation of bad luck, relentless bullying at school, chronic health issues, and grades that barely cleared the bar. And to top it off, his temper made sure he wasn't winning any most popular awards. If there was a club for kids with chips on their shoulders, Stephen would have been the president. But then, like a plot twist in a feel-good movie, Stephen got a job at Disneyland, the happiest place on earth. It seemed like a fresh start. He fixed restaurant machinery, did odd jobs around the park, and somehow went from problem kid to well-liked coworker. He joined the employees' softball team, became a valued member of the team, and even snagged a girlfriend. For a brief, fleeting moment, life looked like it might finally give Stephen a break. Spoiler, but not really, because this is a true crime story. It didn't. Stephen's fairy tale wasn't just short-lived. It came with a trapdoor straight to disaster, because while some people get their happily ever after, Stephen's story was less Disney magic and more dark spiral into infamy. In 1992, Stephen Dean Gordon crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. He sexually abused his own niece. This act didn't just tarnish his reputation, it obliterated the fragile stability he'd managed to claw back. Disneyland, once his sanctuary and source of pride, swiftly showed him the exit door. Gone were the days of fixing machinery and scoring home runs on the softball team. Stephen was now banned from seeing his niece and slapped with a 15-month prison sentence. Upon his release, there was a glimmer of hope that Stephen might finally steer his life in the right direction. He landed a job, he tied the knot, and welcomed a daughter into the world. It seemed like he was rewriting his own story from troubled youth to family man. But as Taylor Swift might say, the story continues. And for Stephen, it took a dark twist. A move to a new home brought financial strain, reigniting his old temper like a stubborn ember refusing to die out. Stephen became a ticking time bomb of volatility, his threats ranging from the melodramatic, like hiring a hitman to cash in his life insurance policy, to the downright terrifying. His wife, fearing for her safety and that of her young daughter, made the brave decision to flee. This desperate escape ignited a fierce custody battle, one that Stephen ultimately lost. Instead of seeking help, Stephen's spiral into chaos deepened, proving that some stories have no happy endings. And as the saying goes, when the chips are down, some people just can't find their way back. Stephen had already lost his family, his stability, and arguably his grip on reality. But instead of taking the L like a grown-up, he decided to double down in the worst possible way. One sunny post-church Sunday, Stephen kidnapped his ex-wife and their young daughter, as if this would magically fix his life. Armed with a stun gun and an apparent lack of self-awareness, he forced them into his car and drove to a secluded spot in Nevada, which sounds exactly as terrifying as it is. Over the course of their captivity, Stephen alternated between begging his wife for forgiveness and assaulting her. If this sounds like a winning strategy to regain someone's trust, it isn't. But his ex, proving she was far cleverer than Stephen in every way, played along, pretending to forgive him. She even convinced him to let her make a phone call, which she used to contact her parents. Her parents, not wasting a second, called the police, who swooped in like the heroes of the story they are, rescuing both his ex-wife and his daughter. Stephen was then sentenced to 10 years for this crime, but of course served only 8. Because apparently 8 years is all you need to re-enter society completely rehabilitated. Or not. Out of prison and back in the world, Stephen soon found someone whose moral compass was just as broken as his own. Franc Cano. It was the start of a partnership that would take the phrase, "two heads are better than one," to some of the darkest places imaginable. When Stephen Dean Gordon met Franc Cano at an auto body repair shop in Anaheim, the two seemed destined to form a connection. Frank, much younger than Stephen, had his own deeply troubling history. Like Stephen, he'd been convicted of molesting a young family member and was slapped with an ankle monitor, a grim badge of a shared disgrace. It didn't take long for these two to become fast friends, bonded not by common interests like sports or music, but by something much darker. Their co-workers noticed the unusually close bond and, in typical workplace fashion, speculated about whether their friendship might be romantic. But whatever Stephen and Frank shared wasn't rooted in love or even companionship. It was something far more sinister. Before long, their shared depravity began to eclipse any petty workplace gossip. Their living arrangements were as chaotic as their lives. Sometimes they'd crash at Frank's hotel room, paid for by his parents, and other times they made do with Stephen's car. Despite this less than glamorous setup, their twisted loyalty to each other only grew stronger. By 2010, they took their first real stab at rebellion, cutting off their ankle monitors and making a break for freedom. Of course, these two criminal masterminds didn't make it far. They were caught quickly and remonitored, a slap on the wrist that did nothing to deter their behavior. A second attempt to ditch their monitors was more ambitious and slightly more successful. If you define success as evading capture for 2 weeks in Las Vegas before being arrested again, and when the law caught up with them a second time, both men received short jail sentences, which, unsurprisingly, did nothing to rehabilitate them. By the time they were released, Stephen and Frank were completely untethered, homeless, jobless, and nursing an escalated anger at the world around them. What little they had left in life was a shared sense of entitlement and a readiness to escalate their crimes. Together, they would become a truly terrifying duo, turning their shared darkness into acts of unimaginable violence. It's not every day that coworkers at a recycling center stumble across something so horrifying it changes the course of a major investigation. But that's exactly what happened in March 2014. The naked body of 21-year-old Jure Nicole Estep came tumbling out of a conveyor belt in Anaheim, and with it, the threads of a much darker tapestry began to unravel. Jure, a sex worker who had only been in the area for a few days, had no idea she was walking into the crosshairs of two of the most disturbed individuals in recent memory. At first, Jure's case seemed like a tragically isolated crime, but as investigators dug deeper, the horrifying truth came to light. This wasn't a one-off murder. Data from Stephen and Frank's ankle monitors placed them at multiple crime scenes. Yes, the same ankle monitors that were supposed to keep tabs on them ended up being the breadcrumbs that led law enforcement straight to their twisted trail. It's almost poetic in the worst possible way. When confronted, Stephen cracked. Not only did he confess to killing 5 women, but also casually offered up details about his and Frank's grotesque hunting expeditions through Anaheim. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime spree. It was a calculated operation targeting vulnerable women. Their victims included 20-year-old Kiana Ray Jackson, 34-year-old Josephine Vargas, 28-year-old Martha Anya, and ultimately Jure Estep. Each crime bore the unmistakable marks of premeditated violence, making it painfully clear that these two had long since crossed any point of return. As if Stephen's confession wasn't damning enough, DNA evidence tied the pair to the victims, and a series of incriminating text messages confirmed their cold, calculated intent. They weren't just murderers, they were predators, deliberately stalking their victims and leaving a trail of devastation behind. For investigators, it was a chilling revelation. For everyone else, it was a nightmare made real. And for Stephen and Frank, it was the beginning of the end. Stephen Dean Gordon's trial wasn't so much a defense as it was a finger-pointing circus. In a baffling move, Stephen represented himself, not to lessen his sentence, but to blame the probation officers for their supposed negligence, because clearly, that was the real issue here. I say sarcastically. Unsurprisingly, the jury wasn't buying it. When they handed down a death sentence, Stephen thanked them and took the opportunity to declare that Franc Cano deserved the same fate. Frank, ever the pragmatist, took a plea deal, securing life without parole. While Stephen went down in flames, Frank quietly sidestepped death row, leaving everyone to wonder if Stephen's courtroom chaos had been less about justice and more about theatrics. In the end, justice caught up with them, but not before 5 women lost their lives. Stephen and Frank will live out their days locked away, while the memories of their victims remain a haunting testament to a justice system that only acted when it was far too late. That's your 10-minute murder story for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, I'm the host, and thank you for taking the time to listen. If you're off to binge more episodes, don't let me stop you. If you're a brand new listener, make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're listening right now. If you want to email me, my email address is on the website, 10minutemurder.com. And here's one of those emails. Hi, Joe. True crime has always been an interest of mine, so I was thrilled to stumble upon your podcast almost 2 years ago. I listen to you everywhere. On my drive to work, while cooking dinner, folding laundry, on my lunch break. You get the idea. You're definitely one of my favorite true crime creators, and I eagerly await your new episodes every week. Lately, I've noticed a surge of true crime podcasts written/narrated by AI, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for keeping it real. Nothing against AI, I just feel like your podcast is a breath of fresh air in a sea of synthetic voices. Keep up the great work. All the best, Shelley W. from Georgia. First of all, Shelley, thank you for taking the time to reach out, and I really appreciate you listening. And yeah, I completely agree with you. At first, I didn't. At first, I thought, well, there are people that probably are a little embarrassed and don't want to talk in a microphone, but they have good research skills and they have good storytelling skills. So this might be a cool thing you could do. You could take your research and your storytelling, dump it into the AI voice box. I don't know what they're called, but you could dump it into there and it will spit out your story, and then boom, you've got yourself a podcast. At first, I assumed that was what was happening until I listened to a handful of them. And this isn't to say all of them, but all of them that I listened to, it's not good. I think people are plagiarizing and just taking someone else's work, dumping it into an AI voice box thingy, and then trying to make a podcast out of that. First of all, that's illegal, stealing someone's work like that. But also, Did you think that podcasting was that easy? Because it's really not. I know listening to it, you think, well, it's 10 minutes. How much work could he be putting into this? And let me tell you, a whole bunch. It takes more money and it takes more time than you would assume that it takes, especially if you want to get it right information-wise and you want to make it as interesting as you can possibly make it. Now, if you don't give a damn, you can make whatever you want to and, throw it out there, but no one's going to listen to it. People will catch on that you don't really care, and then they'll stop caring as well. But yeah, maybe the AI podcasts will eventually get better. I don't have faith in that, but maybe they will. Who knows? I kind of hope not. Again, thank you, Shelley, for the email. And that's going to do it. That is your episode for today. Thank you so much for listening to 10 Minute Murder.